Disabled Marine veteran Sean Howard suffering from ALS and his family at risk of losing their longtime Simi Valley home if they don't come up with $63,000 by January 6th. This is all due to a common practice in the financial world known as zombie mortgages, where your debt is sold to a third party without your knowledge, and then they come collecting with interest years later. And this is all legal. It's not against the law. The Howard's case, one of many on the desk of foreclosure prevention advocate Richard Sherman. He's joining me in studio with more. Thanks for being with me tonight.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me in.
I think that it's alarming to hear a lot of people who have second mortgages, and we want to make clear to our viewers that this is primarily if you have a second mortgage that you are most vulnerable.
It's any sort of junior lien, any sort of junior debt that is other than your first mortgage, essentially.
Okay, so you're owed money that you don't know that, or you owe money you don't know that you owe.
Well, typically what happens is somebody will take out a second mortgage, and then as a result of either a bankruptcy or a loan modification or something they've done, they get the erroneous impression that that mortgage is now gone.
Okay, and no one is calling you to tell you that, hey, you owe this money. That's the biggest problem.
That's the biggest problem. Nobody calls to alert you to it.
How big of a problem is this?
It's massive. I've been at this this particular problem with zombie mortgages, zombie seconds, for better than 2 decades now. I've been yelling and screaming about it, and it gets worse every year.
As I mentioned, this is completely legal.
Yeah.
It's getting worse. You've been yelling and screaming about it. Why isn't this, I mean, we were talking about in the newsroom with the producer about the fact that this is sort of low-hanging fruit if you're a politician. You could come in, you could swoop in, you could be the hero and say, hey, this should not be legal. Why is that not happening?
The lack of political will. I was told years ago by a politician, somebody that just gives you all of this you need to know about politics in California, in my view, at the moment. He said that no politician ever loses their job for doing nothing. A politician only loses their job for doing something that's unpopular. And I guess there just hasn't been enough pain out there about this, there haven't been enough votes to be gathered about this, so nobody seems to want to do anything about it.
But would this be unpopular? Why would
I would think it would be extraordinarily popular.
Right.
It would be in my office.
And does this have a lot to do with the fact that the banking industry is tied to this, of course, and that can line politicians' campaigns?
Yeah, zombie mortgages are incredibly profitable. The zombie mortgage business was primarily, for about 10 years ago, it was nothing but bottom feeders. Now it's publicly traded companies that are getting involved with this. Large companies that have a public face and have a public stock price are getting involved with this. And all they do is deliver misery. They don't do anything to help the consumer. They don't do anything to clean up the debt that these people say they're cleaning up. All they do is they take equity that you thought was yours and they convert it to theirs, and you often lose your house in the process. It's unethical. In my view, it's unethical and it's immoral, but it's legal.
And you started a nonprofit out of this. So if people are, to help people who are dealing with this, if people are watching this and they think, well, what if I'm a victim and I don't even know it? How does one determine if they are?
You have to check your title report. If you have a second that you think is paid off, you need to make sure it was reconveyed. If you think it was not even just paid off, if you think it was just wiped out, it may still be there. You need to check your title. People don't check their credit reports as often as they should. They certainly never check their title reports, and that's the only place it's going to show up until you get a letter saying, hey, please give us an outrageous amount of money before we come take your house.
So if people are considering taking out a second mortgage, which is completely, a lot of people do.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with seconds on their own.
Yeah.
The problem is that they don't get serviced properly. You know, when B of A sells a loan to some other bank, they have to tell you, that's the law, but they don't have to tell you in a constructive means. It means they don't have to confirm that they told you. They don't have to send it by certified letter, so they don't send it. So what happens is people say, well, I never got that. Nobody ever told me. I mean, the Howards didn't hear a peep from anybody for over a dozen years. But now they owe less on the first because they've been making the mortgage payment. The house is worth more than it was a dozen years ago, and now that makes them a target. Now, the fact that Sean's a Marine with ALS, they don't seem to care much about.
So by January the 6th, they have to come up with $63,000.
Well, actually, they needed to come up with $63,000 by Christmas because that's how extortion works. It's most powerful on Christmas, I guess. But we managed to get over that little hump with your associates' help and with the media's help. Thank you very much for that and the public's help.
Sure.
And so SLS has told us, SLS is the bank involved here, they've told us that they're putting off the foreclosure. And I would like to believe them. The problem is there's still a notice of default against their house, which is a lawsuit saying we're going to take your house in foreclosure.
Have you gone to Sacramento?
Multiple times.
Multiple times.
Multiple times. I've talked to politicians of both parties for the last 20 years. I've been having the same conversation because I saw this coming 20 years ago and I said it was going to be bad, and it's exactly what I said was going to happen. It's one thing to know the future, it's something else to be able to do something about it.
Well, we thank you for raising your voice. I know that
As loudly as I can.
I'm sure people are, checking their title records. So that's the number one thing, right? So if you're at home and you have a second mortgage and you're a little concerned, check that title record.
Give us a call. You can find my name.
Okay.
My name is spelled very uniquely. Give us a call. We'll be happy to help.
Okay.